Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our 2021 legislative session debrief. I am Madeleine Thakur, president of the Children's Movement of Florida, and really thrilled to have here with me today Michele Watson, who is CEO of the Florida Children's Council. Welcome, Michele. So I asked Michele to join me here today. She's been a wonderful partner and friend on Florida's Early Learning Consortium, a group that represents parents, funders, providers, teachers, the whole early learning universe. And Michele, in her role at the Florida Children's Council, it leads the umbrella organization of the Children's Services Councils all across the state, the Children's Trusts, all of these wonderful organizations investing in prevention, in supports for young children and families, and really through the spectrum of our education continuum. So Michele has been such an important partner over the years. She understands the system. She has a mind for data and efficiency, and has worked also to make the business case for the policy changes that we need to make. So really thrilled to be here with you today, Michele. We just closed the legislative session April 30th in Florida. More than 3,000 bills were filed. Less than 10% of those made it through the process. I think 273 bills. We've got a $101.5 billion budget. That's bigger than we've ever seen in our state. And of course, it's padded with some of the federal money that's coming in. And you've seen headlines about some of the bills that have passed, but we didn't think you saw enough headlines about what's happening for young children and families. So wanted to talk a little bit about that today. So Michele, I may start with HB 419. This is something our consortium has been advocating for, changes in the accountability structure in VPK to better align early learning programs and with elementary education and beyond. How do you explain this win to someone at the supermarket? I mean, what is so transformational about this legislation?
Absolutely. First of all, Madeleine, thank you so much for having me on today. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak. You know, when VP started in 2005, the program was launched wholly across the state. And so one of the things that it did is it utilized existing infrastructure to get to accountability. And one of the things that Florida had continually been using is this kindergarten readiness mechanism, or flickers, as many of you have known to call it over the many years, as the accountability system, as something that was in place. And over time, while kindergarten readiness is really an important measure, I don't want to disregard the fact that knowing if a child is ready for kindergarten is not important, because it is extremely important. It just didn't allow for real-time data for parents to make decisions. By the time that they were getting information on a provider's performance in the VPK program, their child was already enrolled and tentatively halfway through their VPK year. So this bill really is transformational in the fact that it creates a seamless VPK, even now through 8th grade progress monitoring system that will allow parents and childcare providers to really look at data that is going to inform their learning gains of students that were in their program while they were there, and then do an end of VPK assessment to determine achievement. And so what this does is it will allow the Office of Early Learning to provide that data sooner to the profiles that were created in the bill as well, which should be a nice roadmap on how parents are going to understand what those data points mean in an easily to understand format. So we're really excited just about parents having the choice and understanding around utilizing their VPK opportunity in the best way that fits their child's needs against data that is timely. And so that's, if we were in the supermarket, looking at a family with young children, would say, I am so excited that you're going to get information that you haven't had in the past to really understand what is the best environment for your child as they prepare for kindergarten. It still contains that kindergarten readiness measure but it requires it in kindergarten and in 1st grade and in 2nd grade and in 3rd grade, that we can really look at what makes a ready reader, right? We know that reading by third grade is extremely important to the trajectory of a child's education. And we're finally going to have a system in place that is going to give us data and benchmarks across the state so that we can look at root causes, or what are some things that are working really well in communities, and how to address those with real-time data and information. So really excited about that bill. And it was just time after, this many years to really look at how can we provide better information to parents.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that that better information part is so important. And of course, like you say, that kindergarten readiness metric is really important, but maybe it's worth also talking a little bit more about what this is going to do in addition. And the way I see it, that kindergarten readiness metric really focuses on letters and letter sounds. That's one foundation for reading. We know that language is another really important one, just those interactions back and forth, the magic of how and why questions in preschool and building that curiosity. How does the bill get at some of that?
Well, definitely. The assessment system will need to be aligned to the standards, and the standards will, are already aligned to the kindergarten standards. So I think that this just really is a substantial alignment of one tool, right? One tool that we know will provide information to the state on where is that child trending in far as skill attainment, whether it be some of those social emotional skills as well as those math and language skills, and really align that out all the way from grade level to grade level so that you can truly see a system, right? A system of achievement that is needed to produce a ready reader. And we know that sometimes, developmentally, children will get their letters and numbers developmentally in time, and it might not be till kindergarten, but as long as they're attaining some of that other skill development early on, they're still going to be successful. And we have to take into account that child development is still very much a part of those early years, and so closely tied to age. Whereas, as children get older via grade, you can make some of those advancements in learning gains because the development has now caught up with that child. And so I think it's just a really nice balance of child development and child achievement in a system process.
Yeah. I love what you say about child development. And as the mother of a son born in August, it really resonates. You see when he's the 2-year-old in the class and everyone else is 3, it's really, there's a big difference. And I'm sure that will happen continually through the early part of elementary years too. And that the children are in a different place socially, emotionally, even if they're caught up academically. So I love what you're saying about taking that into account, and particularly for those early years. There's one other piece I think really important in this bill when we think about elevating early learning and celebrating the way that this prepares children for the rest of their academic career, and that is moving the Office of Early Learning, elevating it to a division of early learning under the Department of Education. And we see that that's putting early learning sort of in its rightful place on the education continuum, and giving us a chance, like you're saying, to then view what are our investments doing. And so you talked about parents having better information. It seems to me center directors and teachers will also have better information about interventions earlier on. And then our taxpayers will get a better picture of what are we investing in? Why are these early learning investments so important? And so with you, I'm really thrilled to talk to the parent at the supermarket about what this can bring. And I should say, I forgot to mention at the beginning, we do have participants here on our webinar where we've got people tuned in on Facebook as well. If you have questions, please ask them in the Q&A or the chat. We'll try to get to them, even if it might be a little distracting pop-up in there. We'll do our best. So the next thing, I mean, we said we'd talk today about bills that passed, bills didn't pass, some of the budget items. Another piece of legislation that we see that has really important implications for families and for childcare is HB 1349. This one's on economic self-sufficiency. What will this bill do?
Absolutely. So, children's services councils around the state, as you said, they fund tremendous prevention and intervention services, especially around mental health, toxic stress, child well-being. And one of the things that they noticed over time was that while they were doing this really good work, some of the root cause and correlation is obviously tied to poverty and economic mobility as families move across a career lattice, being able to really attain economic self-sufficiency. And so what we know in Florida is that public benefits programs serve families in very different capacities, right? Housing, temporary assistance for needing families, SNAP for food, Medicaid, childcare subsidy, in all different arenas. But what we don't know in Florida is really how families are accessing these services and in what combinations. Do we have a strong population of families with young children that are accessing childcare, SNAP, and Medicaid, but for some reason TANF and housing are not within their reach? And why is that? And so the bill actually has the Anita Zucker Center for Early Childhood really looking at that data to really look across programs and see if they can do some data matching to determine who's participating in these programs, what's the family composition, and what does not only look like at the state level, but look like at the local level, which will allow communities to do some root cause mapping, right? Is it a transportation issue? Is it a housing issue? And there's large scale transient families. And so how do you really provide services and navigators to these systems that will help families traverse public benefits in a way that gets them to economic self-sufficiency? And then from an overall statewide landscape, what are opportunities for really strong policy implications, right? Where can policy levers be utilized to really help support these families as they're trying to get to that economic mobility, that economic self-sufficiency threshold, and really move forward, which we know will create less toxic stress, a better environment for children as they move forward, based on studies that we know children that spend more time in poverty are more likely to be adversely affected. And so how can we really look at an opportune time as the economy is recovering to say, what are some short-term policy solutions we might need? And then what are some long-term policy solutions that can be put in place that at the end of it are generational, right? You can help the families today, but it will put the child that is part of that family in a strong trajectory and path forward moving on.
Yeah. For those of us who are for anyone who's just joining, we're talking about HB 1349 on economic self-sufficiency. And Michele, you explained that so well. I mean, if I'm understanding right, part of this is about just getting the information we need. And the next step will be allowing our policymakers to look at that and say, are these programs working the way they're supposed to? Is our childcare subsidy and the way we're using TANF and all these other public benefits programs, are they set up to help families move into economic self-sufficiency, or do we need to look at them differently? And so we're certainly excited about that. And the Anita Zucker Center should soon have a first round of data. Do you think we'll have that before the next legislative session?
The goal is, with the timeline, that is absolutely possible, that they would have the first round of data potentially, depending on, the report is not due till May 31st, but they would have some preliminary data, at least maybe potentially at the state level. But the good news is that not only does it look at data, the data requests are for the past 10 years, and then a file to be updated all the way through 2023. So not only would we see the data, hopefully not in a vacuum, right? You would see kind of the pre-COVID usage, you would see the COVID usage, and then you would see into the economic recovery usage, because some policy provisions might need to be short-term, where some could potentially be long-term. So excited about looking at that data, making sure that those reports are useful at the local level as well as the statewide level, and then can really, really be used to think through not only local considerations, but statewide considerations in how to better support families as they work on their job in economic mobility.
Right. Fantastic. I mean, we're certainly encouraged to see the legislature taking an interest in this and in a broad view of how to support families and ultimately how to affect the lives of children. I get to sit in rooms with a lot of really smart people, and there was one day we were talking about toxic stress, and somebody stood up and said, we are so quick to wish to serve children, but often we're too quick to judge their parents. And we know we cannot transform the lives of the children of our state if we're not taking a look at their parents and caregivers. And so that's why this legislation was so exciting to us. I think I'll pause for just a second because we had some questions in the Q&A going back to the early learning bill. And I would say, we are not the experts on this. The Office of Early Learning will be the one implementing it, but I'll throw these questions at you, Michele, in case you know the answer from the bill. You're asking if parts of the flickers will still be administered on a computer within the first 30 days of kindergarten, and also about what interventions might be available in VPK. Is that something you can answer?
So there is a timeline within the bill that does require, kind of an off ramp from the current system. So flickers will be required within the first 30 days of the school year for the next few years, while the progress monitoring system is built. And that is to be launched in 2020. 2023. So there will be an off ramp. As far as the nomenclature around flickers, I don't know if that name will still stick as the first 30-day tool, or if it will be renamed as part of comprehensive progress monitoring, but there is still language in the bill that requires that there be a progress monitoring taken within the first 30 days that will look at and determine kindergarten readiness, but for the purpose is of kindergarten and having that teacher understand that data to inform instruction, not as a look back on the VPK provider. So it is a little nuanced, and some of it might be terms of art that may or may not change, but that really is up to the Office of Early Learning to determine, and the Department of Education, since it's a pre-K all the way through 8th grade system, to determine kind of that those naming conventions and what's going to be utilized.
Yeah. So it sounds like you're saying we're moving to a more fair accountability structure for our providers who work so hard on behalf of children every day. And so instead of taking a look at how did the child do in kindergarten, perhaps 3 months after they left a VPK program, you're looking at that information in a timely way to help the parents, the providers, the teachers. But we still want to have a measure of where are all the children in Florida when they come to kindergarten and that benchmark.
Absolutely. And I think, along the intervention piece, as funders in that space, and our statute clearly outlines that, we cannot supplant K through 12 funding, is this timely data will allow our CSC communities particularly to be able to fund summer bridge programs, right? Children that might not be signaling ready at the end of VPK for kindergarten can hopefully access a summer bridge program. There'll be more ability to focus in on interventions before they hit that kindergarten space, as well as the fact that we'll be able to continually look at what happens during the summer months. What is summer learning loss for these young children? What is the difference between how they exited VPK and how they showed up or scored on that first 30 days in kindergarten? Will be really telling on the importance of summer or continued intersect with education over those summer months. And even if it's an at-home program or things that you can be doing, such as a community outreach and awareness, that's data that will all be really, really meaningful that we've never had before. So, interventions, even locally, not even if you don't have a CSC, can still be funded in really thoughtful ways as you look at that bridge to help support families as they transition to kindergarten.
Yeah, fantastic. So you're saying it's not only the parents, the teachers, the providers, the taxpayers, but the communities who are getting better information to support all of the children in their community. So really, really important legislation, and something we haven't had in 15 years of this program. So my team knows that I'm always very optimistic in what we can do in a half-hour conversation. So we said we'd talk about some of the bigger bills. We said we'd talk about bills that didn't make it through. We might speed through some of this so that we can talk about budget items also. But I know there were several bills we were watching from the movement perspective that didn't make it through the process this year. And our pillars, many of you watching already know, we care about health, early learning, and parent support. And so we've just talked about two bills on the early learning and parent support side. There were a couple of bills on kid care this year that were looking at providing subsidized health insurance for children who it's now offered up to 200% of the federal poverty level. They were looking at expanding that to 300%. So giving more families access to more affordable health insurance. Unfortunately, that did not move. So we'll continue to watch that and would love to see that next year. Another one that didn't move was about native language assessment. And to me, this one was really important for the earliest years when you think about how children begin their academic life. And if you've got a child who's taking that Flickers exam or assessment in English, who might already be an early reader in Spanish and have really strong communication skills, it seems like a lost opportunity for the teacher to know that. Even if he or she doesn't speak Spanish, they'll know sort of where a child is and know that there's a language barrier. Whereas if we're just talking about English language assessment, a teacher might look at the same child and think they're behind. And so we were encouraged that a bill that's looking at changing this, starting with the kindergarten assessment, was heard in committee this year, but unfortunately it didn't move. So we'll watch that again for next year. And Michele, was there anything else on early learning that you were watching?
Absolutely. So, there was the framework, the scholarship framework that was being produced and put in place by Senator Osley that would allow for, if there are unrestricted dollars that are ever available, to really help support students with special needs and foster care parents through a prioritized framework that would allow more access to early learning. And so that bill, is still very important, making sure that those populations are really, really supported moving forward. We understand, that general revenue is not readily available at all times, but if there ever was a funding mechanism, whether it be through gaming or lottery or even sin tax, that there could potentially be a framework in place that helps prioritize how those dollars could potentially be spent to expand services. So I think that that's going to be a conversation over time, especially as we're continuing to look at equity and those opportunities to say, what are the other pieces and parts of a system that needs some focus and some support and funding. So, that was one we were watching. One of the other things that from the Florida Children's Council perspective is summer camp background screenings, making sure that summer camps that might not be the more known summer camps. So you are a baseball facility that offers a baseball summer camp, or a karate studio that offers karate, or even a pottery studio that offers a pottery summer camp, that you understand that you are required to be background screened, and that there is the opportunity for DCF to go in and not necessarily monitor for health and safety, but monitor to make sure that those background screens have been completed, so that we can make sure that children are safe at least the most basic level, which is that they're not in the care of a person who maybe should not be in that facility. So we're really working and focusing on those issues to make sure that parents have all the information that they need to really make strong choices for their children, and understand that, just because your children might be going to a summer camp, it doesn't necessarily mean that there's anybody out there checking to make sure that they're in compliance.
Really, really important. And I'm seeing a theme here that you want parents to have the information to best support their children's learning, their children's development. Thank you for sharing that. I'd like to move over to the budget side because we had some really important wins there as well. Of course, we've got continued funding for some programs that many of you know the Children's Movement has supported for a long time. $1.8 million for Help Me Grow Florida that helps with developmental screenings and access to information and resources for parents. We've got $10 million for Teach scholarships. This is to help early learning educators further their credentials and higher education and best support our children's learning. We saw a $750,000 appropriation for Nurse Family Partnership, all about home visiting and helping parents learn how to be their best, set goals for their families, all sorts of supports there. And then we saw a $21 million increase for Healthy Start, helping, again, mothers and babies get off to the right start. And those are just a few of so many more investments that we don't have the time to talk about. But I did want to spend a little bit of time on some of the bigger ticket investments. And we saw this year $240 million allocated to support postpartum Medicaid extension. So this means that women who are pregnant and qualify for Medicaid for the birth of their child, it used to be that you would lose your coverage after 60 days. So 2 months after giving birth, you no longer have health coverage for yourself. That has been extended now to 1 full year. And we think that is significant. The same way we say, you know, children need to be healthy to be able to learn, parents need to be healthy to be their best. And so mothers having that opportunity not to worry about their own care after their children are born is really significant. And then, you know, we mentioned it's the largest budget we've seen in Florida's history. And part of that is with some padding from some federal funds. Michele, do you want to say anything about some of what's coming down on the early learning side?
Absolutely. So, and I think significant, obviously, in the budget, there was about $643 million that was part of the ESSER dollars, which was the second economic stimulus package. And then there's almost about $2.5 billion coming down as part of the American Rescue Plan with very targeted provisions around it. So stabilization dollars of 1.5 billion to help childcare providers stabilize the business, which is the infrastructure, which we need to get the economy back to work. And then about $1 billion on the other side to increase CCDF services to families. So really thinking through, how do you utilize those dollars in combination to ensure that there's strong infrastructure, that the economy gets back on track. There's going to be tons of opportunities for the state of Florida to utilize those dollars in a really thoughtful way. That work will also be led by the Office of Early Learning. And so I know that they'll be really excited not only to help the small businesses of childcare providers, but also making sure that the families are receiving services that they need to get back into the workforce to make sure that their children have a strong foundational start as they move forward.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned, I think, 635 million of that second round. And there are a lot of acronyms in this world. Many of you will remember the CARES Act. That was the first one that was passed. And then the second one called CARES 2, that's where that 635 million comes in. And we've seen the Office of Early Learning has already put out $120 million of grants to childcare centers. And also $166 million of bonuses in there. And that means that we are celebrating our early learning instructors, the directors in our preschools and childcare centers, and giving them bonuses, just like our first responders, just like our K-12 teachers, in celebration of their essential work during this pandemic. And then that leaves, as Michele was saying, a whole lot of dollars that can be used to help support our system, our essential childcare workers and providers, and ultimately our children and families for affordable childcare that is a foundation for their education. So there's much to celebrate here. Of course, there's much work yet to be done. But Michele, thank you so much for joining and sharing in this briefing. the conversation has been recorded, and you can find it on Facebook afterwards. I saw a question just pop up. And again, we're happy to share these updates on what's happening. The Office of Early Learning is going to be a major implementer here, and they have authority over these funds. But if you have any questions, we're happy to serve as a conduit and help raise any questions. And certainly if you have other questions about the legislative process that we couldn't cover in half an hour, do let us know. The movement has been pleased over the last several months to continue our parent advocacy trainings, and we really want more Floridians to understand the system, the ways to get involved, the ways to raise your voice if you have a concern, a suggestion, an ask. And today I just want to thank you again, Michele, for joining, and thank all of you for taking an interest in how we can address the lives of parents and children through our policy. So stay tuned. Our next webinar will be next month. You'll hear about it very soon, and we'll talk about some of what you mentioned, Michele, thinking about toxic stress and community approaches. So I'll just give you that preview, and everybody stay tuned. Thank you very much.
Thank you.